6,700 comments on videos this year. 6,700 comments offering corrections to misinformation and helpful advice. So it's time to set some wrongs right. And this video is sponsored by Squarespace. Now, as you know, as YouTubers, we make bold statements. And as is evident in the 6,700 comments, we, or more me, can, well, sometimes just be plain wrong. And I'm just not willing to let those mistakes go unchecked. So I'm going to put those wrongs right. Now, a huge amount of that is going to center around this workbench, as it is the biggest thing that I've made this year. And there were so many mistakes with it that it's actually got quite comical. But let's start with a few of the other wrongs first. Let's start with jigs. Housed within this chest of jigs are the first 5 jigs that woodworkers need. Or that's what the title said anyway. It is a bold statement, but I stand by it, with a pinch of salt, of course. Let's quickly clear some things up. These are the 5 jigs. Not all woodworkers need these. It's really just a good guide. Anyway, a quick positive first. Since releasing that video, I've been a little bit surprised. Out of all 5 jigs that were made, this has proved to be by far the most useful. You see, with the help of these match fit clamps, whatever the shape of the board you're actually cutting is, so long as it fits on the jig itself, you can use the jig to get yourself a straight edge. This is proving itself to be the most useful jig I've made so far. But the title of the video isn't "What did I get right?" Where I was wrong was this saw guide, and I was very wrong. The whole idea of this jig is it can convert your circular saw into a cheap track saw. The edge acts like a cut guide and it supports your saw through the cut. But I made it so that the thin side of the base of the circular saw rode on the guide. This is just plain wrong, and boy, did you guys let me know. And you were right. If you make this for yourself, and I recommend that all beginners do, make sure that the wider part of the base of your circular saw runs along the base, not the thinner part. What that will do though will offer you so much more stability. And you're going to avoid a lot of the tipping that you saw in the video. Oh yes, and while we're on the jigs video, this sled is for the thicknesser. You all rightly pointed out that the batten needs to be at the front of the sled rather than at the back where I showed it. This sled is basically to help you flatten a board if you don't have a planer. And the way this is set up, the rollers can risk pushing the board straight off the front and leaving this where it stands. You don't have to remake it. Just send it through the other way. That way the batten stops your piece being pushed off the sled. Simple. Simple. It turns out I've been using that quite a lot. And this seems like a good time to just touch on the 2 taglines or mottos that seem to have come around through the channel this year. And a few of you may have already noticed that in some of the replies to comments, I've been putting things like simple genius down. Now, I'm not calling you simple. You see, we all start this journey with high hopes and aspirations. And there's going to be times where, in trying to fix an issue, we get bogged down in the details. And there's been so many times that you guys have been able to help me deal with the issues such as my table saw fence saga. And I've been replying to these kinds of solutions with 2 simple words. Simple, genius. Now, the second phrase I've used a lot is workshop wins, and we'll get to that one in a second. Let's just finish up on the simple genius chat, because it does tie in with me getting it wrong quite a lot. I went down quite a rabbit hole this year to try and get a solution for my table saw's biggest weakness. This. The fence. I was just finding that as someone new to having a table saw, having a lot more support would have been useful. Bo have actually released a table saw extension fence, which is brilliant, but sadly it comes at a price. So obviously, to try and avoid this, I tried to make my own. To cut a very long story short, I made 2 utter fails. One success of sorts, but well, it wasn't perfect. And then this aluminium extrusion fence. But to try and attach it to the existing table saw fence was proving to be an absolute nightmare. And that's where you lot hit me with some pure and simple genius. And I don't mean 1 or 2 of you, I actually mean hundreds of you. I can safely say now, do not go through the issue of making these complicated towers. Just keep it simple. Someone said just clamp it to your table saw fence. 99% of any boards you use with it are going to slide under those clamps anyway. Simple genius. Others of you said, well, why not just drill through the existing fence and then bolt it to the extrusion? Simple genius. And a few other people, less than the other 2 options, had this idea. Just drill down through the extrusion and clamp it to your fence. Simple genius. I was obsessed with making one fence to cover all bases, and I got completely blinkered in my obsession. That was until you lot brought me back to reality. So to keep it simple, I just stripped the fence right back. I even took the rollers off. I really liked them, but I only really used them for larger plywood sheets. And so I simply just made a second fence for them. That way I can have this extension on my fence at all times because it remains light and easy to use. Then for the rare times I'm cutting some larger ply down, I just swap it out. You don't need one fence that does absolutely everything. There are a ton of different ways to get any job done. And as YouTubers, we all have our opinions. Some will state them as fact and never look back. For me, I think it's important to acknowledge all of your inputs into the channel and the knowledge you guys give. And that leads me to my second theme, if you like, of the year, and that's workshop wins. All year I've been urging you to find your wins. See, whatever reason it was that you got into woodworking, I would guarantee that it was not to be stressed or pressured by what you're making. And that is exactly why I urge you to find your workshop wins. These can come in many shapes and sizes, but for me, it's those 30-minute wins. Make anything. It doesn't have to be stunning, just a win. Something that will serve a purpose. Let me show you what I mean. This is a workshop win. This is a workshop win. This is a workshop. This is a workshop win. This is a workshop win. And these are workshop wins. I've done a number of videos on these where all the builds are for the workshop. So when I have that 30 minutes free and my day hasn't gone exactly to plan, I just come down here, throw a bit of wood together, make a little bit of sawdust and leave a little bit lighter. Now back to where I was wrong. And this is a big one. Just the title to begin with, one bench to do it all? Absolutely wrong. No bench can do everything. If you're starting on a bench build, there are two really important things you need to know. Number one, no two benches are the same or should be the same. You see, this might be the most personal project you will ever do. And number two, no bench can do it all or should do it all. Your bench build should be a combination of every bench build you ever research plus your own ideas. And once you've done that, you should filter it all down, figure out what's important and what's a luxury. Nail down the important bits and then only add the luxury bits in if you can. But there are some key areas that you do need to consider. And before I dive into them, I just want to talk to you about this week's sponsor, Squarespace. Whether you're looking for an all singing, all dancing website or just something simple that complements exactly what you're doing, their template system makes getting started simple. You can take inspiration from hundreds of templates and ideas to make your own bespoke website. Then simply select from millions of URLs to get your own domain, with premium privacy and security features included with every single purchase. I love my site. Tool recommendations, personal blogs, video links, I can offer information and advice all in one place. But I've only really just scratched the surface. Whether you're looking to sell products, do invoicing, managing payments in general, or you may even want to set up and sell your own online course, well, head over to squarespace.com for your free trial. Just start with a layout that fits your brand, upload some content and start customizing. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/startmaking for 10% off your first purchase of website or domain. Now, back to those key areas to consider for your workbench. Number one, height. I was wrong here. Mine is too low. Think about the way you work and the tools you use. Will you work above the bench or will you work on it? I made mine at this height because I was doing most of my work on a Moxon vise, and the Moxon vise raises your work up by quite a few inches. But then I added all these lovely dog holes and hold downs. So now all my work is down here. And now this is too low. Now I can raise it up and that's fine. But for every inch I raise it up, well, that's an inch of storage that I could have made use if I'd have got it right the first time round. And that may not sound too problematic, but consider this. My dust extractor was 10mm too tall to fit in, meaning it would have fitted perfectly if I'd have got the height of the bench right from the start. But now, it'll never fit in. And your second consideration should be, what's integrated? I wanted a table saw as priority one, but I didn't get it quite right. Mine's central, and that's half right. You get a lot of support, but you waste a lot of vital space. If you position it all the way to one side, then that leaves you enough room to mount a router underneath your workbench, and you can use the fence off the table saw as the router fence. And all you're really using up is space that you've already lost under your table saw anyway. It's free. Number three, your countertop. And this started off as a huge win for me. All it is a thin layer of laminate glued onto the ply beneath. It's not cheap, but it is perfect to clean. It wears well, it looks cool, and importantly, it doesn't reflect any of my lights when I'm filming. But one mistake for you to avoid that I made is not edging every single bit of it with solid wood. Because if you don't do that, it chips really easy because as strong as it is, it's also brittle. Number 4, underbench storage. Make the most of every area you have. Thin shelves are a really clever way of incorporating lots of tools around your workbench. Use drawers whenever you can, but don't use expensive slides. There's easier ways. And have fun with it. And with that in mind, I decided to make this entire section about dust extraction. And though I'm going to go into more detail and it will feature in a future video, this undermounted cyclone separator in the center of the workbench, I'm really happy with that. Though one thing to note, if you make more dust than me, you may need to consider something a little bit bigger. Number 5, and this is vital, overall size. It's really tempting to do what I did and try and make the table as big as you possibly can. And don't get me wrong, the size is good, but if you're going to go for this size, make it in 2 parts. That way, if you need extra space in your shop, you can push one side away to the sidewall and just do most of your work on a smaller bench. But the biggest error of all is when I tried to add these wings. I genuinely thought that an extra foot of width for whenever I needed it would be a really good idea. But between me and you, I've raised them exactly 0 times. The sides on their own are great for holding work vertically, but that's about it. Number 6, consider your hold down options carefully. I tried all options here. Don't do that. It's not efficient and it's pricey. I did dog holes, T-track and even dovetail grooves for the match fit system. That is a lot of different accessories to either make or buy. I'd say you can get away with any 2 out of the 3. For me, it's dog holes and dovetail grooves. The only place I have T-track is along this side. And honestly, you could use the match fit system with the dovetail grooves for this too. What I use it for is simply to slide in my magnet bars or my French cleat to hold my movable tool holders or my bin. But these dovetail grooves for holding work vertically are brilliant. And in all honesty, I could do with a few vertical grooves just for a bit more versatility. But the dog holes rule the workbench. But I still didn't get it right. My dog holes are hand drilled and I marked the grid with a ruler and pencil. Don't do that. Take the time to either buy a guide or make one. That way this grid becomes absolutely accurate like an MFT table. For anybody considering this, check out 10 Minute Workshop. Peter Millard has gone through every option out there. What I have really only works for hold downs. And with that, let's just talk about the best and worst accessories that I've made for it. Firstly, if you're going to make dog holes, make sure you fill them when they're not in use. Otherwise they'll fill themselves and that'll be annoying. To start with, for this I made my own plugs and the theory is sound and they'll work okay in a pinch, but they're not perfect. Don't put magnets in them. Instead, put something metal in them and use a magnet to remove them, just because they will end up sticking to your tools when you lay them down on the workbench. That'll drive you nuts. Overall, the best option that I found to fill the holes up is from Bench Dogs UK. These metal discs that sit just below the surface. From Bench Dogs UK or cheap on Amazon, you can buy the standard dog itself and both will do a great job. I actually find that I turn to my homemade ones more than the shop bought ones. The plain stop is particularly useful, as is the multi-faced dog. And my favourites, well, they're the dog biscuits. Not everything that I experiment with works, but these were a real win. As for hold downs for work, ones that I've bought in, these ratchet clamps are my personal favourite. They don't need to go right the way through the bench like others do, and they are really versatile and strong. I don't get on particularly well with these screw ones, as they do take a little bit of time to get set up and they can pull away from the workbench. And I don't use the T-track clamps at all. They look to be pretty good for jigs like table saw sleds, but for holding work down or on the workbench, they're way down the list. But we're here for mistakes. The worst accessory I have for my workbench, and the one that took the most time to make, is this butcher's block on the top. I think the idea is absolutely sound, but my execution was far from right. I made mine from lots of pallet wood, and I made a right mess of it. Where I've routed out the channels and not glued the boards up correctly has led to some serious warping and cupping. It's actually moved in a way that the grooves have become tighter, so sliding a clamp into them has got even trickier. So a good idea, just a terrible execution. On the other hand, pop-up dogs are just brilliant. And one final thing about the bench. Make a detailed plan, or better still, buy one. I didn't, and these areas underneath suffered as a result of it. Decide what you want to fill them with, whether it's these containers or simple drawers, and then make the space custom fit for them. Right, that's enough bench bashing. Even with all the mistakes, it's still a tool that serves me incredibly well. And I do genuinely still believe that the first tool you make in your woodworking journey should probably be a workbench. Anyway, now for some bad advice given throughout the year. This is the bit where things that I've recommended throughout the year turn out to be not as good as I originally thought. First one is wrapping handles in this rubber drawer liner. Don't do that. It comes away too easily. Let's just keep it simple. Either use ice hockey stick tape if you can get it, or nitrile rubber with contact adhesive. Don't use an entire sheet around the handle because it's got much more chance of springing back. Just cut thin strips and wrap it around. And I mentioned the bench cookies earlier. They work absolutely fine. But while cork is okay, it can still slip, especially on a laminate workbench like mine. And that's where I really love the dog biscuits because they just can't move. But overall, nitrile rubber is far more grippy and it doesn't shine up like cork tends to over time. Now I love this tip. I suggested that you could tape a little block of wood to your speed square for repeated angle cuts. But I found out since that there's a simpler, far more effective solution. Use a tool that's actually made for the job. This is a stair gauge. You simply screw it to your speed square and use that. Far more accurate, far less likely to move. And finally, push sticks. Here are my range of push sticks. And I've taken a bit of stick from you guys over the last few months for these. So I think it's necessary for me just to clear up when and where I use them. And I just want to reiterate at this point, these are just my ideas. And they should never be just copied, especially if you don't feel that this is the safest way to get the job done for you. First of all though, paddles I use just for the router table. You could also use them for a planer, I just don't have one. If I'm cutting and I'm not going all the way through a piece, say a dado or a groove, then I always use the G-Ripper. The same can be said if I'm passing a smaller piece through the table saw and I need that extra control over both sides of the cut. But these are where most of you think I've got it wrong, and the truth is, for me, the jury's out. So take all of what's about to follow with a pinch of salt and make your own choices. For thin cuts where I can't use either of these, I use this one. I much prefer this one to this because it just makes my hand feel like it is that little bit further away from the blade. However, I don't mind this if I need to control two sides of the cut going through. Then I'll use them in tandem. But genuinely, for everything else, I use these. Where I've taken most of the stick, pardon the pun, is that when I made them, this bit here was too thin. And that's absolutely correct. So when I made a second version, I fattened it out. The biggest critique I got of these, apart from the fact they're massively over-engineered, is the fact that people worried that I was putting a lot of downward pressure to keep control, and that if there was any kickback, my hand would go into the table saw itself. And I can see your concerns. But here's my counter. This end here on the main paddle push stick weighs a lot. It's a chunk of 3/4 inch ply. So in placing that on the board, already you've got quite a bit of downward pressure. And then with the design of the handle, I'm not actually physically pressing down from the shoulder. I'm doing a twist to the wrist to push the board through. And what you're actually doing to push against this bit here is almost raising your arm up and over. But it doesn't matter what I think. In truth, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks at all. Please make your own choices where safety is concerned. Do your research and be careful. I've made mistakes in nearly all of my videos. In fact, all of my videos. But there is one mistake that I've made that is far bigger than any others to date. In numerous videos, especially in the early days of getting my table saw, I did what a huge amount of YouTubers do and I removed the blade guard to get the best shot. That was silly. Not only is it there for a huge amount of safety, but it actually improves your dust collection. If sight is an issue and you're struggling to line up a cut, simply do what I've done. Make some markings from each side of the teeth on the blade, going back to the front of your table saw, and line your cut up long before it gets to the blade. Or sneak up on a cut. In this situation, I was wrong, and I don't want anybody copying me. This crown guard reduces the chance of kickback. It protects your fingers, and it improves dust extraction. That's easily enough reasons for me to use it. And finally, I recommended these for your tools, or at least the ones that you want to turn on remotely. But I failed to add in that video that I only trust mine because whenever I leave the workshop, I can switch all the power off with one switch. That way these can't accidentally turn on while I'm away from the workshop. A couple of years ago, Keith, Rag and Bone Brown, included in a video a very stark warning where he experienced his dust extractor turning on when he wasn't in the shop overnight. Could have been an extreme fire hazard. I don't want any accidents caused from bad advice that I've given. And that's why it's important to make one of these videos every single year. The fact is, we all make mistakes, whether we're just starting out or whether we're very experienced. On a build, well, you simply learn to hide them or make a feature out of them. But where safety is concerned, a second chance isn't always offered. I'm learning every day, and that's why I appreciate every single comment teaching me along the way. So with that in mind, I'm going to offer one last bit of advice. And for once, it is a mistake that I actually managed to avoid. And I'd like it if you guys did too. Don't let social media hold you back. Sadly, on many platforms like Facebook, for instance, you're going to find a lot of gatekeepers and, simply put, trolls. And a lot of these groups look like they're aimed at beginners and people looking to learn. But the sad truth is, sometimes people asking for help or offering to show projects that they're learning on find themselves experiencing a lot of negativity and downright insulting behaviour. If that happens to you, my best advice is just walk away. It's the only way you're going to find a better place, a better group. Because the simple truth is, even the gatekeepers aren't perfect. They're just not brave enough to show their mistakes or ask for help. They just want to spend their time making you feel like you can't do it. There are a couple of groups that I would highly recommend. For those of you in the UK, Woodworking UK. From what I've experienced, it seems to be a very supportive and well-run group. Those of you in the US, well, John over at Lincoln Street has set up his own page, and Matt Outlaw from 731 Woodworks has one too, both of which tend to be better than the Woodworking for Beginners sites that I've seen. So once again, thank you so much for supporting this mediocre and proud woodworker on what is a bizarre YouTube journey. 2024 was surprising, satisfying, and staggering in equal measures. And if 2025 delivers half of what last year did, I'll consider myself lucky. As I always say, your support is never taken for granted, and I want to wish you health and happiness and success in all of your endeavours that you will be undertaking next year. If you've got 30 minutes spare in the coming days, start making. Thanks a lot for your time. There's a couple of videos there. If you watch them, I'll see you over there.